Hello, this is the Lord's Legion and welcome to a brand new countdown, and in this video we're going to be counting down the top 15 interesting Fantastic Four concept art. It has been a long time coming since my last concept art video, and since it's been like 3 months and the fact that the Fantastic Four won by a landslide on the last poll, I think this is long overdue. And since it's been all but confirmed in that the Fantastic Four are returning home in the MCU, I feel like this is the perfect opportunity into looking back on some of the concept art from previous movies. And since the Fantastic Four only have a few films under its belt, I'm going to be focusing on the 2000 series as well as the 2015 reboot, since there's plenty to discuss from both series. So without further ado, let's begin with the countdown. So kicking off at number 15, we have a monstrous thing from Fant4stic. Now this version of the Thing does remind me of the scene from the actual film itself where he does reawaken in his rock form for the first time, in which he does look more bulky and monstrous than what we ended up getting in the final product. And it seems like from the earlier developments we could have had a more monstrous Thing for the entirety of the movie. Which, looking back, this version of the Thing does remind me to some degree of the 90s version where he did undergo a further mutation. And while not as spiky as the 90s Thing, I can see some similarities in the sense that he's much bulky and looks more like a rock monster than an actual humanoid being. But ultimately I am glad that we did get a more traditional Thing, or at least a traditional-ish version of the Thing in the reboot. But even still, I do think this design is rather interesting. Coming in at number 14, we have an alien-looking Doom from the first Fantastic Four movie. Now first and foremost, I do want to stress that I'm glad that this wasn't the final design for Doom, because this reminds me more of an alien that you would see from Star Trek than Doctor Doom. Although I do think I know what they were trying to do with this design by making them look more cybernetic and intergalactic, which, given the cosmic rays and the mutations that this version of Doom went with, I do kinda see how this could work. But even still, the cape is too over the top and the face just looks creepy, and unless he had prior knowledge in that this was intended for Victor Von Doom, I highly doubt that anyone would point out that this is in fact Doctor Doom at first glance. And now that I think about it, looking at the more metallic, fleshy version of Doom, I think some of those elements from that design was carried over into the 2015 Doom, which is pretty atrocious. And for number 13, we have Unusual Pairing, also from the reboot. Now this piece of concept art stems from an earlier pitch for the reboot where it was going to be more focused on the comic book aspects of the Fantastic Four. And looking at both Ben and Susan, they do seem to have much sleeker designs in comparison to what we ended up getting in the 2015 reboot. With Ben, he does have massive arms, although he also does have a much slimmer body build. And the proportions of the Thing's body is unlike anything we have seen from previous incarnations, at least from what I can recall. And then as for the Invisible Woman, when you see her in her intangible or invisible form, it does appear that they were going in a much different direction for her powers as well. And she kind of reminds me of Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp in the sense that her invisible form looks both kind of tech-based while also a little eerie as well. So making its way onto number 12, we have the Fantasticar from Fant4stic. Now we have heard numerous times in that the reboot initially intended to have some variation of the Fantasticar, and we even had a cheeky little nod to the Fantasticar in the final product. But even still, it is pretty interesting to see how the Fantasticar could have looked like if it was to appear in Fant4stic. Because as you could imagine, the Fantasticar itself would have looked somewhat gritty and almost steampunk, which in a way it does work given that this universe was much grounded in comparison to the previous incarnation. And given that the movie was intended to be the introduction of the Four, the Fantasticar itself does look very primitive, and to give credit where credit is due, this version of the Fantasticar is a pretty solid representation of what it looks like from the comics, while also being grounded enough for this version version of the Fantastic Four. So moving on to number 11, we have the Negative Zero Zone, also from Fant4stic. Now as you all know, Planet Zero was meant to be its version of the Negative Zone in the movie, though I feel like this version of Planet Zero does look somewhat closer to the actual Negative Zone that it was based on, because we do have the floating rocks, and even the colour palette I do feel matches more in line with the Negative Zone itself. Plus I did notice that the ground itself does look almost disgusting and organic like, which would have made for much more interesting pocket dimension. And it does match up with a certain villain who was linked with the Negative Zone that I will cover in just a little bit. Coming in at number 10, we have Metallic Flesh-Faced Doom from the original Fantastic Four. Now on the surface, this is a really good incarnation of Doom's mask. The crafted eyebrows are on point, as well as the nose, and even the mouth is pretty accurate despite it looking a little more humanoid than it's usually depicted, which could indicate that we could have originally saw Doom talk while the mouth part of his mask also moves as he speaks. However, on the flip side of that, I don't think this makes a whole ton of sense for Doom to have this version of the mask, because it's very much evident from both the comics and even the first film in that Doom doesn't like to see his face being scarred, and so why would his mask be almost an exact representation of his real face but metallic? And while it does look very cool, the more you think about it, it doesn't really match Doom's character. So for number 9, we have the Wacky Cosmic Transformations, also from the original Fantastic Four. Now admittedly, there's not really too much to go off of, but in terms of its visual representation, it looks both creepy yet also creative. From seeing the rocks coming out of the Thing's body, to the Human Torch screaming in agony as fire explodes from his body. And I have noticed that they perfectly picked all 4 of the elements to represent each transformation, especially with water for Reed as well as air for Susan. And while I sort of understand why they didn't go with this for the final product, because this would have been nightmare fuel, but at the same time this is just so creative. Coming in at number 8, we have Herbie from Fant4stic. Now I'm in two minds about Herbie's exclusion from the final film, because on one hand he wouldn't have worked in the reboot given how serious it really is, but at the same time given how depressing the universe was, Herbie would have been a decent comic relief that could help give it some light. And to me it is very jarring in that the reboot of all things was at one point considering on including Herbie in the film, because we've never seen Herbie in any of the previous films either. Plus the design itself does go hand in hand with the Fantastic art in that it does look very primitive yet also grounded to reality. And once again, this is a decent transition from the comic books to Josh Trank's version of the Fantastic Four. Making its way to number 7, we have the Skinny Surfer from Rise of the Silver Surfer. Now I'm not gonna sugarcoat this, but this is just pure nightmare fuel in my eyes. Which in a way does add in this design's favour in the sense that he is meant to be inhuman and that he is from outer space. And clearly this version of Norrin Radd is much more alien in comparison to the final design. Though while this version of the Silver Surfer does have the colour palette, he does seem to lack the actual silver shine. And his overall body is much more fleshy in comparison to how the Silver Surfer is normally depicted. While I do understand where they were trying to go with this design, I am glad that they scrapped this one in favour of a more comic accurate Silver Surfer, because truth be told, the Silver Surfer was probably the saving grace from that film. And for number 6, we have Armoured First Family from the original Fantastic Four. Now if you look at the actual designs themselves, you can see that they were clearly inspired by the 90s Fantastic Four, in which they did have more edgy costumes. However, the costumes in this version did seem more futuristic and armoured in comparison to what we traditionally see out of the Fantastic Four. But what's even stranger was that at one point they were actually considering on a adapting Susan's terrible 90s costume in which her breasts are near exposed. In which I think we can all assume that this was the right call for them to avoid this design for Susan, because that could have sparked a massive uproar among fans. Finally getting to the top 5, we have Castle Doom from Fant4stic. Now this to me feels like a massive missed opportunity because for those who don't know, Dr. Doom rules the country of Latveria and he lives in a massive castle, which for some reason most adaptations seem to shy away from. And even though this version of Castle Doom would have originally appeared in Planet Zero, I still think this would have been really awesome to see some incarnation of Castle Doom in the movie. And what I enjoy about this design is the fact that it does seem very old school, while also appearing to be in ruins much like Planet Zero itself, which does give off this eerie and dark atmosphere. Speaking of Doom, for number 4 we have Ra's al Doom from Rise of the Silver Surfer. And why I'm calling him Ra's al Doom is because the jacket and even the collar does remind me much like Ra's al Ghul, which isn't even an insult. And when you compare the previous costume Doom had from the original Fantastic Four film to this piece of concept art, then this new design would have been a good upgrade. And despite of the hood, it does seem more accurate to me, because the colouring on the clothes do seem to pop much brighter, and plus his metallic arms are exposed much like his original comic book counterpart. Hell, when you look at the armour part on their own, they seem to be more in line with the 616 Doom than anything else. And if they were to give him back the iconic cloak, then this would have been a perfect costume for Dr. Doom. Because if you ask me, a Doom costume would be incomplete without a cloak. Making its way to number 3, we have Cloverfield looking Annihilus from Fant4stic. Now for those who are unaware, the original draft for Fant4stic was to include Annihilus as the main villain for the movie, but at the last second he was scrapped due to budgetary reasons. But even still, there's plenty of designs of Annihilus, and believe it or not, this is the closest version to the comic book Annihilus that I could find. And even then, this design does seem way off in comparison to the original Annihilus. Aside from the wings, I can't find a single piece of armour around his body, and to me this version of Annihilus looks much more like a fleshy dragon than the humanoid insect hybrid that's enhanced by both technology as well as the cosmic power. And even if we had Annihilus in the final movie, I do feel like there would have been some controversy regardless. Storming its way to second place, we have the true Galactus from Rise of the Silver Surfer. Now this one to me is as frustrating as the original Dark Phoenix from The Last Stand, in the sense that during their early developments, both designs were spot on and yet they were completely scrapped. And while it is tricky to appreciate Galactus's full body, clear as day you could tell that this was in fact going to be an actual being as opposed to being just a cloud. Because not only do you see the silhouette of his helmet, but you can actually see what the helmet looks like, and you can even see his hand as well as the actual torso piece of his armour. And this to me is just about as perfect as you could get for Galactus, and for the life of me I don't know why this was ultimately scrapped in the final movie, because this just would have been phenomenal to see on the big screen. And finally for number 1 we have the comic costumed Fantastic Four from Deadpool 2. And I know this is a bit of a cheat, but how can I leave this one out? Because to me the idea of seeing a continuation of Fant4stic in Deadpool 2 and completely covered in comic accurate costumes is very bizarre to me. Well, I say comic accurate, but really it's more of a mix of Fant4stic and Ultimate costumes, which would have actually made sense in Deadpool's universe. Now, what role they would have had in Deadpool 2 remains to be seen, but the idea of this incarnation of the Fantastic Four being redeemed is so fascinating to me that I just had to put this at number 1. So which piece of concept art from the Fantastic Four movies did you personally find the most interesting? Comment below and share some thoughts, and don't forget to go on the poll and vote on which franchise I should focus on next. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video, please like and subscribe, take care and have a good one.